And despite predictions of a hung parliament and a tight result, Labor's election victory was so emphatic it was declared just minutes after the final poll closed last night. It ended a campaign that offered two very different visions of the future.
Thank you to the people of Australia for the chance to continue to serve the best nation on earth.
Last night, an emotional Anthony Albanese became the first Prime Minister in 2 decades to win a second consecutive term. It was a rough night for Peter Dutton, leading the coalition to its worst electoral result in history, even losing his own seat, ending his parliamentary career.
It's not our night, as I point out, and there are good members, good candidates who have lost their seats, and I'm sorry for that. We have an amazing party and we'll rebuild.
In Australia's increasingly presidential style of campaigning, the 5-week struggle offered stark contrasts of the two would-be PMs. While both had their stumbles, they presented voters with very different takes on leadership and strength.
The problem is that Australia is seen at the moment with a weak leader.
Kindness isn't weakness.
While cost of living, Medicare, housing and defence spending all shaped the campaign, for the opposition many policy cut-throughs were negative. Peter Dutton's apparent backflips on work from home and electric vehicles tax breaks, as well as his doubling down on nuclear energy, a plan experts had called expensive and impractical.
Is this the end for nuclear?
I don't think nuclear was the reason we lost this. I think this was a smick campaign by Labor, destroying Peter Dutton.
And it was the opposition's seemingly ill-advised embrace of the culture wars that framed the final week of the campaign.
I think this whole woke agenda has to come to an end.
Just 2 days after a neo-Nazi disrupted an Anzac Day ceremony by booing the welcome to country, the opposition leader said,
I think a lot of Australians think it's overdone and it cheapens the significance of what it was meant to do.
And it seems many voters felt some of his policies, like cutting 41,000 jobs from the public service, were an echo of Elon Musk's American government slashing Doge, the shadow of Donald Trump looming over the whole election.
We saw you wearing a Make Australia Great Again hat at a time when Donald Trump was...
Goodness. Donald Trump doesn't own those 4 words.
We do not seek our inspiration overseas. We find it right here.
So, as Labor takes a victory lap and the coalition faces the electoral wilderness, what should voters make of this historic result?
As always, our first preference vote goes to speaking with Sam Maiden from news.com.au. Sam, it is an emphatic victory for Labor. Clearly, they now have a mandate for government, but what is this a mandate to actually do?
Well, it's a mandate to implement the policies that they took to the election. So obviously that will mean a whole bunch of policies in the area of housing. They obviously want to roll out all of those changes that they proposed in terms of 5% deposits, and also in relation to Medicare and tackling bulk billing. Now, some great ideas there, no doubt, that clearly voters liked, but also the bar is going to be very high, that they need to hit those targets. They've also got a mandate, if you like, for pressing ahead with that idea of that tax on superannuation balances of more than $3 million. That was regarded as very controversial because it tackles unrealised gains. It's not going to affect a lot of people, but did not make the Conservatives happy. So they've got a mandate for that as well. They've run it to the election.
This was the worst result for the coalition ever, and Peter Dutton is out of Parliament altogether. What lessons should the Liberal Party take away from this?
I think there are some pretty big lessons for the Liberal Party in relation to this result. I think they've got to completely reimagine themselves. That doesn't mean abandoning key Liberal policies such as, better, fairer, lower taxes, despite the fact that some people would argue that Angus Taylor did during the election. One of their biggest problems was they went to this election without a coherent tax policy. Their, economic team was suggesting that they're going to repeal tax cuts. Since when do you have a Liberal Party repealing tax cuts? And there was a lot of criticism that the tax cuts they did offer were temporary. So fuel excise, but just for 1 year, a little tax cut for low and middle income earners, or I should say $1,200 a year when you put your tax in, but again, only temporary. So they're going to have a big job on their hands to really tear up the rule book, if you like, and basically get back on the job of how they can be a proper opposition that is holding the Labor Party to account.
Sam, a lot of people noticed the humility that Peter Dutton showed in his speech last night. Do you think if we'd seen more of that version of him throughout the campaign, things might have been slightly different?
Look, people always say this in relation to Peter Dutton. Look, I've dealt with him on and off for 20 years. You know, I covered the first election where he was elected in the 2001 campaign, and you know, I've seen him all through. We've had some good times, we've had bad times. You know, I always like to point out that he did call me a mad witch in a text message. But
That's
you know,
a compliment,
I got along with him,
Sam.
I
That's a
think,
compliment.
pretty well.
He sent it to you, right?
Yeah.
And there was another word in there.
I've always been into witches, you know. But look, I don't think he was a bad guy, right? But I don't think that he was the right guy for the Liberal Party to make its leader. You know, at the end of the day, the voters have spoken. It is what it is. Would he have gotten a different result if he walked around cuddling a teddy bear and telling us more about, you know, how he liked to cook a seafood soup? I've got no idea. But the bottom line is he didn't have the policy that he needed to win the election. And the voters, you know, I mean, the situation in his own seat, I actually think is extraordinary. I mean, I have previously described it as like a citizen's arrest. These people knew him for 20 years. He was their MP, and faced with the choice to put him into the lodge, their own person, they decide to, you know, terminate that in a fairly aggressive fashion and put Ali France in there as well. So, you know, that's a pretty brutal verdict.
What about Angus Taylor? Does he wear in any of this blame?
Well, I think that the Labor power broker, Graham Richardson, made the point overnight that if Angus Taylor is the answer, the Liberal Party is asking the wrong question. That's a little bit rough. But, you know, that's what they said. Of course Angus Taylor has to take some of the blame. He was the Treasury spokesman. He's the guy who went on radio and said he was going to repeal tax cuts. He's the guy who sat there when they were going to, you know, do things to work from home and allowed that to run. He didn't speak up about those things. You know, so of course he has a lot to answer for. And look, they're in a tight spot. They don't have a lot of good choices. They do have Josh Frydenberg waiting in the room, if he could, waiting in the wings, if he could ever get back into Parliament after he was booted out from Kooyong. So there's a few other people that might, you know, come down the line later on. But right now, it's really, I think, Angus Taylor is the front runner. Susan Lee's in the mix. Jane Hume probably for Senate leader if she can dislodge Michaela Cash. And, you know, Andrew Hastie's kicking around, but I don't think anyone thinks that he's going to be the leader over those group of people. They're the front runners.
Sam Maiden, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just want to start off by saying that I don't think I need Peter Dutton's recipe for seafood soup.
Yeah, it sounded weird.
Yeah, definitely fine that he didn't reveal that over the campaign. It's interesting because this kind of mandate is usually delivered when people are really sick of the party that's in and they replace them with somebody else. It's very rare for this to happen in a second term. So it's really theirs to lose now, you would think, that third term. And I did feel a bit for Peter Dutton because you think this guy's been in his seat since 2001. He's been voted in, and then to not only not become the Prime Minister, but then to also just not be in Parliament, to not even win his seat. It's like a pretty big loss.
Yeah, and I actually thought his concession speech last night was incredibly gracious. His note about kind of saying that Albo's mother would be incredibly proud of the man that he was, I thought was really quite warm and gracious. I felt bad seeing kind of his bottom lip quiver. He was there with his sons, and it was kind of the first time we've actually seen some real emotions from him as well.
Interesting too that this is the first time in 21 years we've had 2 consecutive terms.
Yeah.
I'm like, that is so strange because that used to be the norm, but you do realise, oh yeah, we have flip-flopped left, right and centre.
I liked when it was musical chairs. It was exciting. We had a new Prime Minister every week.
But there's this soul-searching that needs to go on for the Liberal Party, I think, is so critical. You need a strong opposition as well. But, you know, I think it's really interesting already so many of these Liberals and Nationals blaming things like Donald Trump, blaming the media, blaming Labor lies. There does need to be some honest reflection, I think, about the policy platform that was offered. You know, maybe you can't win an Australian election if you only speak to certain media or if you only try and appeal to certain voters. I think if the coalition's going to win office again, they're probably going to have to think about some of those teal seats in our biggest cities.
Could they see a teal then parachuted back into the Liberal Party? Could that be an option? Could that deal with the...
Look, it's often said that the likes of, you know, Allegra Spender, you know, the member for Wentworth, should be a senior figure in the Liberal Party. She comes from Liberal Party stock. But, you know, these people have been elected now in their own right as independents. You know, what's the lure for them to go to a party that looks like it might take 2 electoral cycles to get back to office.
Totally.
What about could the Nats be the leader of the coalition? Because it's actually not that far away. Could we get Barnaby Joyce becoming Prime Minister is all I'm asking for.
Bridget McKenzie, maybe.
I think. But Barnaby's he's a bit of fun.
A history-making election result has redrawn Australia's political map, delivering Labor a thumping victory and all but wiping out the Liberal Party from large swathes of Australia's biggest cities.
Today, the Australian people have voted for Australian values, for fairness, aspiration and opportunity for all.
Now, we didn't do well enough during this campaign. That much is obvious tonight, and I accept full responsibility for that.
In Melbourne, the Liberals facing a citywide wipeout. Its final few seats of Menzies and Deakin set to fall. More seats flipping red in Sydney as well, as the independents compound the opposition's pain, likely to take out the blue ribbon Bradfield. The Liberals now evicted from Sydney's North Shore.
The fact that Bradfield in Sydney, in the leafy North Shore of Sydney, with a hardcore Conservative Liberal branch in it, has gone to Nicolette Buller as an independent candidate, it's another blow to the Liberals.
In Tassie, Labor steamrolling across the north with swings of more than 10% in Bass and Braddon. Another devastating blow in Adelaide with the once safe Liberal seat of Sturt, now Labor. And in Queensland, Coalition Heartland saw some massive flips. Labor set to pick up 2 of the 3 Green seats won in 2022. And the biggest upset? Opposition leader Peter Dutton losing his own seat of Dixon to Labor's Ailey France.
The first time in 24 years, Labor now holds the seat of Dixon.
So, as the Australian political landscape is redrawn, what will this weekend mean for Australia's future?
Well, here to figure this out for us is the former Treasurer and Labor Party President Wayne Swan. Wayne, an emphatic win overnight. In terms of your mood right now, your vibe, on a scale of 0 to 3 full terms, where are you landing?
Well, I think it's a landslide, the likes of which we haven't seen for over 30 years. And it was unexpected to a certain extent. But I think people wanted a very clear decision. They wanted a majority government. And of course, I think people had grave doubts about Peter Dutton. So I ran into a punter at the pub before, and he said to me that Peter Dutton couldn't sell electric heaters to an Eskimo. And I think that sort of underpinned the doubts that people had about the opposition leader. But also, I think the Trump impact as well. So you put all those together, and it was a terrific win for Labor and a huge defeat for the Liberals.
You mentioned Dutton kind of helped, and his devastating loss really helped play into this Labor victory. But how much of this do you think came down to Anthony Albanese as a leader?
People have underestimated Anthony, all of his political life, and what he showed in this campaign, particularly in the last couple of months, was absolutely exceptional commitment. And I think people saw that in him. They saw the determination. And I think that moment in a debate during the campaign where he said leadership is just not about strength, but it's also about kindness, was a very big contrast with what's going on elsewhere in the world, but in particular, a strong contrast with Peter Dutton.
First-term Labor put out a lot of policy failures and they blamed it on the Greens and international circumstances. But I suppose winning a big majority like this comes with big responsibility. So do you think there are fewer excuses this term for not delivering?
Well, we had a cost of living crisis which was internationally induced. It was remarkable that we got to the end of the campaign and people were favouring Labor over the Liberals in dealing with the cost of living pressures. So, yes, there's a very big responsibility to deal with economic management, and I think the government's up to that task. We're through the worst of the international impact of inflation, but the economy has big challenges, particularly given the behaviour of the United States in the economy at the moment. So the government has an awesome responsibility to chart a steady course through international uncertainty.
You're obviously elated at the result, but you must have known Peter Dutton for years. Do you feel for the guy?
Of course you do. I mean, politics can be a brutal business, and to lose your job on national television is something that no one really wants to go through. I thought he spoke exceptionally well last night, but he didn't manage to do that through the campaign.
Well, the coalition has really been sent into the political wilderness in a way. What are the dangers in a government not having a strong opposition?
Well, the government will not have the numbers in the Senate, but more importantly, with that big majority comes big expectations. So the government is on notice, if you like, from this election that people want to see performance, because, you know, the size of the swing could easily come back and bite the government if it isn't seen to successfully deal with the challenges before us. And I think the government and Anthony Albanese absolutely understand the importance of this moment and the importance to knuckle down and to perform.
Wayne Swan, thanks very much for making some time for us tonight.
Thank you.